I welcome you formally, my students. I am Iqbalur Rahman. I teach political science and I am teaching this course for many years. In the lectures on this theme, on the United Nations, use of force, collective security, balance of power, self-defense, we in previous lectures discussed all these issues. I would say that the collective security is an idea with a long history. In brief, the history of the idea has to be placed before you just to create a sense in you that what it is. Its implementation in practice has proved to be problematic. It was neither completely failed nor completely successful. The idea of collective security is built on the ideal that the collective of one is, the security of one is the security of all. If the security of one is violated, the rest of the others will come to its help. And through collective method, through collective measures, through joint action, the victim state will be protected and the aggressor will be dealt with. This was the idea which was incorporated in the Charter of Treaty of Westphalia, in the Treaty of Westphalia of 1648, in the League of Nations, and later on in the United Nations. Dear students, for the management of power, for controlling the exercise of power, its uses, there are two methods. One is balance of power. The other is collective security. Both are security models. Of these two, collective security is very viable model for securing peace and security in anarchic society of states. The idea of peace could be preserved by states acting together, was institutionalized in the Treaty of Westphalia 1648, dear students. Peace through this idea was not attempted. It remained inoperative. The same idea became the basic principle of the League of Nations in 1920 and later of the United Nations in 1945. Working of this ideal in the League was problematic. The League had many strengths and weaknesses. It possessed the ability to deal with the issues of peace and security from diplomacy to the sanctioned use of force structurally were in its arsenal. It possessed a great number of weaknesses ranging from structural issues to the absence of powerful nations who did not join the League of Nations. Historians attribute the failure of the League of Nations to several key causes, but one of the primary cause that historians continue to discuss today for the failure of the League of Nations, for the failure of the collective security, are the structural weaknesses of the League. They were the primary cause of the failure of the collective security that eventually acted as a cause for the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939. The structure of the League limited its ability to act. What was the limitation? Each state, each nation possessed one vote, and to pass a motion or any resolution, the assembly had to be unanimous in its power, equaling out the influence of strong and weak. This led to the failure in implementing many ideas, as only one country has to vote against the resolution to prevent its passage. So, this weakness, this structural weakness of the League was one of the cause which is still believed that led to the failure of the League of Nations, led to the failure of the collective security which was formalized in the structure of League of Nations. The most controversial provisions of its covenant were Article 10 and 60. They respectively raised the issue of naming an aggressor. Who is an aggressor? Who attacked? Who was the first party? Attacked the other party? Naming an aggressor was a problematic subject, and League failed to decide about. The issue was that before the enforcement measures to be taken, who had committed the aggression had to be decided. This system proved to be largely ineffective, as even if one member in the League Council disagreed, meant no decision and no solution. This was the major drawback, that all decisions had to be unanimous. All members must agree on the action. These articles made identifying aggressor difficult and decision making next to impossible. These weaknesses of the League overpowered its strengths, and failed in achieving some of the goals which allowed the outbreak of the war, the Second World War. Despite the fact that the League's collective security system was not very robust, it was not very robust one, as is of the United Nations. Its record, especially of the first decade after its creation in 1920, is designated as a very successful one, a very successful epoch of its working in terms of issues of conflict it has resolved. The majority of the issues, the disputes which were referred to it, League successfully resolved them. Actually, it failed to contain the aggressive action of the Axis powers, Japan, Germany, and Italy. It would not be wrong to say that the international system of which the League was part itself had failed. In other words, the international order based on ideals of respect for sovereignty, cooperation, and non-interference, which the League intended to promote and preserve, was not able to effectively actualized. Despite all its flaws, the League of Nations left a legacy and gave many ideals which helped in the founding of the United Nations. Some of its non-political activities continued throughout the World War II, and its secretariat did valuable preparatory work for the emerging United Nations. Ultimately, in 1946, it was officially declared dissolved, non-existent. So, as far as the question of collective security, in practice, in the League of Nations formulation, in the League of Nations working, we say that it was not though very successful, and it failed particularly in some respects of great powers. It was successful in many respects. So outrightly to say that it failed, it would not be an appropriate position, an appropriate opinion with regards to what it has actually contributed towards peace. In 1945, UN was created for prevention of war, for peaceful resolution of disputes, and for promotion of cooperation among its members. In its collective security structure, the United Nations has adopted a very robust kind of system, not completely foolproof, as the League at the level of structure faced the problems. In the very beginning, with respect to United Nations working of the collective security, I made a point that the system of the United Nations, of course, is a very robust one, but it is not completely foolproof. That in all cases of questions of maintenance of international peace and security, dealing with the questions of resort to war, it had to be successful. And that too in the presence of the Society of States who operate in an environment of anarchy. The Security Council is not the only organ of the United Nations state entrusted with the responsibility of maintaining international peace and security. The primacy of Security Council, the Charter actually, through Chapter 7, authorizes the Security Council to deal with the questions of collective security, to deal with the questions of maintenance of international peace and security. General Assembly of the United Nations, Secretary General of the United Nations are also given entrustments to carry out their role for peace and security. To say that the UN and its family of organizations are working for peace, the whole system of United Nations is actually working for the ideal of maintaining international peace and security, though the primacy is of the Security Council. Based on the idea of liberal institutionalism, where multilateral institutions are to facilitate interstate cooperation, the United Nations intended to bring the major military powers together with the main task of maintaining international peace and security. Since its creation, it has sought to work for peace and cultural. Since its inception, it has sought to work for peace and curtail plagues of a past characterized by two world wars. However, this has been fraught with some difficulties. To understand the working of the United Nations in the area of peace and security, what is required, in brief, outlining of its structure and function is an essential first step for determining its role. UNSC is basically authorized by the Charter to act in matters of peace and security. It consists of 15 members, 5 of which are permanent and 10 are non-permanent members. 5 have the veto power. They are United States, United Kingdoms, Russia, China, and France. These were the military powers when the United Nations was created. The Charter provided for them the veto which is in question, which is questioned by students, which is questioned by scholars, which is actually criticized at length. The Charter provided for them the veto right, believing that peace is dependent upon the cooperation of the great powers. It would prevent them from going to war against each other, while creating a necessary balance when taking decisions on security issues that would be collectively enforced. This illustrates how the constellation itself was based on peace and security considerations, and there has in fact never been a direct physical war between 5 permanent members since the creation of United Nations. The activity and the responsibility of the United Nations are considerably more extensive than those of the League. Any action authorized by the United Nations Security Council to enforce collective security under Chapter 7, Article 3951 of the United Nations Charter can only be justified under Article 2, which is about Military Staff Committee, which requires agreement by member states to place their armed forces at the disposal of the UN. However, under Article 42, such a limitation is not expressly stated. Article 39, dear student, was worded so widely as to allow the Security Council using the implied powers allowed by that article to bypass the problems and authorize that member states voluntarily furnish armed forces to be under the unified command of one member state. So the restriction imposed under Charter, under Article 42, the wording of Article 39, it is so wide that it allows the interpretation that not necessarily when there is no military staff committee of the United Nations, any member of the United Nations can be entrusted this job of securing the security under the willing cooperation of interested parties. So, upon the basis of such implied power, an enforcement action was justified under Security Council recommendations. It was North Korea in 1950 and to liberate Kuwait in First Gulf Conflict 1991. Dear students, only twice has the United Nations Security Council, under the provision of Article 39, identified an aggressor and then used force to halt the aggression. Argentina was also identified as aggressor when it attacked Falkland Islands. In case of Argentina, it was the United Kingdom that used the force, not the United Nations. The UN has recorded several important successes in halting local armed conflict and spread of disputes. For example, in the Congo, Kashmir, and Cyprus. However, it has often proved unable to take effective action in any situation where the interest of either of the United States or the former USSR or any permanent members are involved, or where they seem committed to opposite sides of disputes, supporting one party in the dispute, the other supporting the other party in the dispute. So thus it was unable to check the Soviet invasion of Hungary in 1956 and of Czechoslovakia in 1968. It has not succeeded in finding a permanent solution to the extended crisis that has periodically erupted in Arab-Israel wars in the West Asia. I quoted few incidents here. The purpose here is not to bring into discussion all the acts of maintaining international peace and security where the UN has played a role, or either by the Security Council or other organs of the United Nations, bringing some episodes, some activities where UN was involved, is intended to make you to have a picture that when it has done and was successful and where it failed. So in matters which I referred here, The case of Korea of 1950 and the Gulf War of 1991. Actually, this was the actions undertaken by the Security Council under Chapter 7. And these are the only two actions where the Security Council had decided. And in first case, it was made possible because of the boycott of the Soviet Union, who was not attending the Security Council in support of the Communist China. Issue, my dear student, is here that only two incidents, but many of the other activities United Nations has involved. I will only discuss here few of them, not in details what it had done, particularly in all of those. Until the turn of the century, the Security Council, until the turn of the century, the Security Council, not willing to declare anything other than use of force by one state against another to be a threat to international peace and security. It only focused to deal with the issues pertaining to states. Issue of maintaining international peace and security, where the states were involved. Since the end of the World War II, there have been around 111 military conflicts worldwide, but only 9 of them have involved 2 or more states going to war with one another. The others have been either civil wars in which other states have intervened in some manner, not necessarily that they have done so. The meaning of the collective security changed because of the change of the nature of the conflicts. The nature of the conflict changed, so the collective security has evolved into a different frame where United Nations had to adopt its role according to the threats faced by international community. What we see is that the nature of the conflict has changed. State wars are very few. Wars of internal nature, ethnic, sectarian, and various other kinds of threats, civil instability, terrorism, even a pandemic, disease, the defense of community values like human rights, economic well-being, social justice, and livable environment, peacekeeping and state building. So many things are being faced by the United Nations is addressing all of them. The UNSC after 9/11 passed a resolution 1368 declaring that acts of terrorism to be threats to international peace and security. In terms of disease, beginning in January 2000, the Security Council held regular sessions under Chapter 7. AIDS became the first health issue the Council described as a danger to the collective security. There is a broad interpretation of the Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. This has opened space for addressing the questions of peace falling short of enforcement measures. This has allowed the recognition of broad range of matters as threats to international peace and security, despite the fact that they were traditionally seen as domestic in nature and were not to be taken up by the United Nations to resolve them, as the Charter prohibited interference in internal matters. The United Nations has an active presence in the world through peace operations, which has become central to the UNSC and its approach to maintaining peace. The mandates cover a range of threats contributing towards sustainable peace. What UN is doing? Creating sustainable peace. There is no mention of peace operations in the United Nations Charter, and the concept of peacekeeping has adopted a line with shifting nature of wars and understanding of security, leading up to today's multi-dimensional peacekeeping operations. This is the innovative thing in matters of managing issues of concern, which could become threat to peace, breaches of peace, and in some situations where aggressions could also be possibly committed. The fact is that the UNSC has been able to legitimize certain norms and practices even when they intrude into the realm of national security. National security was thought to be absolute. This is what, on the basis of which the structure of the United Nations was built upon. It rests on it, but through United Nations resolution, the absoluteness of this idea of sovereignty has been made questionable, and that absoluteness has been made limited. The states have been made accountable for their actions. They had to justify their actions before the world community and to the United Nations, primarily. The UN is indeed the sum of its part, composed of member states with their individual interest. But states interact in this institutional context, continue to shape states' evolving interest, enabling policy changes that corresponds with its task of maintaining peace and security. The United Nations Charter contains stronger provisions for decision-making than those of the League of Nations Covenant. It represents not a complete system of collective security, but a balance between collective action and collective security. A balance between collective action and continued cooperation of the state system, including the continued special roles of great powers like League. It has not agreed to the meaning of the term aggression. The term aggression, though it has been addressed by the General Assembly, but it is still so elusive that states have not agreed to the meaning of what constitutes an aggression. This still needs to be addressed. But leaving aside this weakness, the UN itself has, without referring who is the aggressor and who is not, that this becomes a very difficult question to decide. UN is engaged in addressing the issue, not actually identifying that who has committed the crime, who has attacked, who has resorted to force. States in the UN collective security systems are selective to support and oppose UN action in certain conflicts. Based on their self-interest, they do it. The UN can be somehow seen as the platform for self-interest purposes for members of the United Nations, members of the Security Council. Because of the permanent members' veto power and the successive assistance or aid which have made those states to act unilaterally and to ignore the approval of or to violate resolution of Security Council. So their interest remains primary. So on the basis of the interest, they try to support the collective measures, the actions undertaken by the United Nations. The United Nations has proven to be flexible, not very, I would say, very successful, but it has been very flexible in its attitude towards addressing the issue of peace and security. The UN, dear student, offers comprehensive solutions to the problems of peace and security. This is very extensive role of the United Nations. It adopts new international legal norms, structures and processes for international cooperation and provides a platform for diplomatic contacts, international discussions, meetings and conferences. There is no issue of international concern where we don't see that the UN is not actively involved. However, the working of the United Nations in matters of collective security need to be evaluated in the light of the assertions of the second Secretary General of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld, that the organization was not created in order to bring us to heaven, but in order to save us from hell. These words are instructive to the role of the United Nations in the context of its role in regarding collective security. There can be no foolproof system, my dear students, for ensuring security in an anarchic society of states where there is no supra-state authority to regulate states' behavior. Even in states, in territorial domain, we don't see complete peace. States struggle. And in the international system where the society is anarchic, this possibility that there would be complete peace, it is an utopian ideal. United Nations in some sense has evolved as the only actor in global governance having legitimacy. So it has institutionalized governance. And we see that there is no issue we face where United Nations is not involved, not addressing, not bringing the states at its platform to deliberate, to talk, to discuss, and come forward with some kind of the solutions to address the issue which they face, which the international society face, which the people of this world face. But the United Nations is there to deal with these situations. I conclude that the real success of the United Nations has been in its role as a normative power, guiding the global understanding of acceptable behavior, thereby establishing peace and environment for sustainable peace. What it is doing? Sustainable peace. Addressing the case by case, the questions of threats to peace, breach of peace, and acts of aggression, but through different ways, through different resolutions, through different manufacturing of laws, it is addressing, it is creating the environment whereby the peace could be solved. The idea of collective security could be put to practice successfully, and the United Nations has done so because of, on the basis of some of the failures, some of the questionable things, to categorize the United Nations as a not successful organization, that too in the situation where the United Nations operates is the society of states who have created it and who operate in an anarchic system, and where they believe that self-help is the best help. So to weaken this ideal, to create sustainable peace, United Nations this way is trying to help the world community, to the society of states, to create security for all. For this lecture, I end here. Thank you.